Jimmy Page found a little girl selling her dead father's guitar for $50. What happened next made the music world cry. An 8-year-old girl was sitting outside Macari's Musical Exchange on Denmark Street, holding her father's 1959 Gibson Les Paul, ready to sell it for £50 to help pay her mother's medical bills. She had no idea that the man walking toward her in the afternoon drizzle was about to recognize the 20,000-pound vintage guitar instantly. What happened in the next 30 minutes became one of music's most shared stories and reminded everyone why musicians look after their own. October 27th, 1976. Denmark Street, London's music district, was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. 8-year-old Lucy Hartwell sat on the stone steps outside the famous guitar shop, a handwritten sign beside her that read, "Guitar for sale." Lucy was small for her age, with blonde hair that fell around her shoulders and a denim jacket that was too big for her, probably her father's. The battered guitar case beside her was covered in venue stickers from places she'd never been. The Marquee, the Roundhouse, small clubs where working musicians played for £20 a night. Inside was her father's 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, worth nearly £20,000. Lucy believed it was worth £50. Her father, Michael Hartwell, had been a session musician who died of a heart attack 6 months earlier while teaching Lucy basic chords. The Les Paul had been his prized possession, bought used in 1973, and carefully maintained ever since. Now her mother, Sarah, was in hospital with pneumonia complications. Her condition was serious enough that doctors recommended private treatment to help her recover properly and prevent any long-term problems with her breathing. The NHS would cover the basic care, but the specialized treatment that could make sure Sarah got completely better cost money the family didn't have. They'd already sold everything else of value that morning, while her mother was at the hospital for tests. She'd taken the tube to Denmark Street, remembering her father mentioning that this was where real musicians bought and sold instruments. She'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours, watching people walk by without stopping. One dealer had offered her £40, saying it was nothing special, bit worn. She was getting cold when she noticed a tall man walking down the street. He was in his early 30s, with long dark hair and wearing a worn black leather jacket. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in this part of London, hands casually in his pockets. Jimmy Page had been visiting Macari's to look at vintage amplifiers. He was between Led Zeppelin tours, working on material for what would eventually become their next album. As he walked back toward his car, something caught his attention. A young girl sitting alone with a guitar case, looking determined but overwhelmed. This wasn't a street performer. This looked like someone trying to solve a problem. Jimmy approached slowly. "That's a Gibson case you've got there." Lucy looked up. The man's accent was refined, educated. "Yes, sir." "Mind if I ask what you're doing?" "I'm selling my father's guitar. He passed away and we need the money." Jimmy's expression softened immediately. He could see she was trying to handle this like an adult, but she was still just a child. "I'm sorry about your father. What kind of guitar is it?" Lucy stood and carefully opened the case. Inside, nestled in worn purple velvet, was the Les Paul. Jimmy went very still. Even from 3 feet away, he could see this wasn't just any guitar. "Jesus," he said quietly, then caught himself. "Sorry. May I take a closer look?" Jimmy knelt beside the case, careful not to touch anything without permission. The guitar was in remarkable condition for its age, a few small dings and some honest wear on the back. But the finish was intact, and the hardware was original. "Do you know what year this is from?" "I think 1959. My father told me it was old and special. Jimmy felt his stomach drop. A '59 Les Paul in this condition was worth more than most people's annual salary. He looked at the simple sign, then at this child who had no idea what she was sitting next to. "What's your name?" "Lucy Hartwell." "Lucy, I'm Jimmy Page. I'm a musician too, like your father was. Can you tell me why you're selling this?" "My mom's been sick. She's getting better, but the doctors say private treatment would help her recover faster and make sure there's no permanent damage to her lungs. We don't have insurance for that kind of care. I thought if I sold this, it might help with the bills." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, processing what he was seeing. A child trying to solve her family's crisis by selling what was probably the most valuable thing they owned. "Lucy, this guitar is worth much more than 50 pounds. Much more. This is worth about 20,000 pounds. Lucy's eyes went wide. 20,000? At least. Maybe more to the right collector. Someone was going to buy this from you for 50 pounds. Someone offered me 40, but said it wasn't worth much. Jimmy's jaw tightened. Someone had seen an opportunity to take advantage of a child who didn't know better. "Where's your mother now?" "At the hospital. She's having tests done." "What's the hospital called?" "University College Hospital." Jimmy pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call someone who can help with the medical costs. But first, promise me you won't sell this guitar to anyone today." Lucy nodded, still stunned by what she'd learned. Jimmy dialed. "Dr. Harrison, it's Jimmy Page. I need a favor. There's a woman named Sarah Hartwell being treated at UCH. Pneumonia complications. I'd like to cover any private treatment costs. No, I haven't met her yet, but I'm about to help her daughter with something important." He hung up and looked at Lucy. "Your mother's treatment is sorted. Whatever the doctors recommend, it's covered." "I don't understand. Why would you do that?" Jimmy sat down on the step beside her. "When I was starting out, there were times my family struggled financially. I got my first guitar when I was 12, but it wasn't new. I practiced until my fingers bled because music was the only thing that made sense to me. I know what it's like to worry about money when someone you love needs help. Now I'm in a position where I can help. But you don't even know us. Your father was a musician. He took care of this guitar, which means he respected his craft. You're trying to help your family, which means he raised you right. Musicians look after each other, Lucy." Jimmy reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "This is my manager's number. When you're older, if you ever decide to sell this guitar, call him first. He'll make sure you get its true value. But honestly, I'd keep it. What if we still need money?" "You won't. I'm also going to arrange for a fund to help with your family's expenses while your mother recovers." Lucy stared at him. "You're really a musician?" "My band is called Led Zeppelin. Maybe your father knew some of our songs." Lucy's face lit up. "He played your music sometimes. He said you were one of the best guitarists he'd ever heard." "Your father had good taste. What was his name?" "Michael Hartwell." "Well, Michael Hartwell's daughter, you've got his guitar and his spirit. Learn to play it properly, and maybe one day you'll be as good as he was." Jimmy stood up and helped Lucy close the guitar case. "Let's get you home. Your mother's probably wondering where you are." "Will I really be able to keep it?" "That guitar belongs in your family. Your father would want you to have it, not some collector. Besides, 20 years from now, it'll probably be worth twice as much." As they walked toward Jimmy's car, Lucy carrying the guitar case with both hands, she asked quietly, "What was it like when you started playing?" Jimmy smiled. "Difficult. I practiced for hours every day, sometimes until my parents told me to stop. but I knew music was what I wanted to do with my life. Your father understood that feeling too. During the 20-minute drive to Lucy's modest flat in Kentish Town, Jimmy learned more about Michael Hartwell. He'd been a respected player in London's session scene, the kind of musician other musicians called when they needed someone dependable who could play multiple styles. He never minded not being famous, Lucy said. He said the music was what mattered, not whether people knew his name. He was right. Some of the best musicians in the world are people you've never heard of. They're the foundation that everything else is built on. When they arrived at Lucy's flat, Jimmy helped her carry the guitar case to the door. The building was old but well maintained, the kind of place where working families lived. Lucy, this guitar connects you to your father and to every musician who's ever played it. Jimmy wrote something on the back of his business card. That's my home number. If you ever have questions about the guitar, or if anyone ever tries to pressure you about selling it, call me. You'd really answer? Musicians look after each other, remember? That includes the next generation. 3 hours later, Sarah Hartwell received a call from the hospital that changed everything. Her treatment had been upgraded to comprehensive private care, fully paid for by an anonymous benefactor. When Lucy explained what had happened, Sarah couldn't speak for several minutes. A stranger did this for us. Just because you had your father's guitar? He said musicians are a family. And he said Daddy was a good musician. So that made us part of the family too. That evening, a delivery arrived. Inside was a child-sized acoustic guitar with a note. Lucy, this one's for learning. Your father's is for when you're ready. Practice every day, but only if it brings you joy. J.P. The guitar was a Martin with a warm, rich tone. Lucy spent that evening just holding it, feeling the smooth wood, imagining her father's hands guiding hers. 2 weeks later, Sarah received another call. A comprehensive music education fund had been established in Lucy's name, enough to pay for professional guitar lessons through her school years. The fund administrator explained that the benefactor wanted to ensure financial concerns would never prevent Lucy from pursuing music if she chose to. A month later, Jimmy Page appeared at their door carrying a small amplifier. I thought Lucy might like to hear what her father's guitar sounds like when it's played properly. For the next hour, Jimmy played the 1959 Les Paul in their small living room. He played blues that seemed to come from deep in the instrument's soul, rock riffs that made the walls vibrate, gentle ballads that filled the flat with beautiful sound. Each note seemed to carry her father's presence. This is what your father heard when he played. This is the voice he fell in love with. The story of what happened that day spread quietly through London's session musician community over the following months. Not as gossip, but as an example of the unwritten code that bound them together. Help when you can. Look after your own. Word reached other musicians throughout the city, and soon small acts of kindness were happening across London's music scene. A drummer helped a struggling guitarist get session work. A bassist paid for another musician's child to attend music camp. A producer waived studio fees for a young songwriter who couldn't afford them. The phrase, "pulling a page," began appearing in conversations around recording studios, meaning to help someone quietly without expecting recognition. It became shorthand for doing what's right because you're in a position to help. Jimmy Page never spoke about it publicly. When journalists occasionally asked about his philosophy on helping young musicians, he'd give general answers about responsibility and community. Musicians who knew the story understood. Real help happens quietly. Lucy Hartwell grew up to become a session musician herself, following in her father's footsteps, but with opportunities he never could have imagined. She studied at the Royal Academy of Music on a scholarship Jimmy had quietly arranged, graduated with honors, and began working in many of the same studios where her father had once played. She still owns the 1959 Les Paul, now worth considerably more than £20,000. It sits in her home studio in North London, where she teaches guitar to students from all backgrounds and financial situations. Every year, on October 27th, the anniversary of her meeting with Jimmy Page, Lucy takes her father's guitar out and plays it. Not for recording, not for an audience, just for the pure joy of hearing that voice again and feeling the connection to her father and to every musician who understands that some things are more valuable than money. She tells her students about technique and practice, about the discipline required to master an instrument. But sometimes, when a student is discouraged or worried about money, she tells them a different story. She tells them about the day she learned that the music community is a family. Music connects generations. It carries forward the best of what came before, while creating space for what comes next. That guitar has never been for sale. It never will be. Many of Lucy's students have gone on to successful careers themselves. They carry forward not just technical skills, but an understanding of music's deeper purpose: to create connection, to preserve beauty, to help people understand they're not alone. Today, if you ask session musicians anywhere in the world about pulling a page, they'll know exactly what you mean. It's become international shorthand for helping someone quietly, without expecting recognition. The phrase has spread beyond London. Anywhere musicians understand that their community is only as strong as its commitment to helping others, the ripple effects of that one afternoon on Denmark Street continue to spread. Teachers help struggling students. Doctors provide pro bono care. Business owners quietly cover expenses for employees facing crises. All because one man saw a child trying to solve an impossible problem and chose to help. Sometimes the most important music happens off stage, in small moments that remind us why we play in the first place. Sometimes it happens on a quiet street in London, when someone recognizes that a family's connection to music is worth more than money. That's the story of the day Jimmy Page found a little girl selling her father's guitar and chose to preserve both the instrument and the family that treasured it. Not because it made good publicity, but because it was simply the right thing to do. The guitar survived. The family survived. The music continues. All